what unscrupulous leaders in ostensibly democratic societies want to do is to take over the existing institutions gradually and subtly, not by a military coup, not by something that is overt, but instead by stacking their membership with true believers and by undoing the content of the rules that prevent corruption, that prevent self-dealing, and that prevent the kind of punitive treatment of people who don't toe the line. And sadly, it turns out democracies can be toppled that way.
We are privileged to have with us today Martha Minow, Harvard Law scholar, and her many other things, author, human rights advocate, constitutional law, fairness, privacy, forgiveness, international criminal justice, and a leader who has really been formative for many of the leaders of this country and beyond. And so we're thrilled to have you just have a conversation with us today. So excited to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Really great to be with you.
What have the last 4 years, have they strengthened us or weakened us, in terms of the law?
So it's a really great question. There are now some much more vigorous watchdog organizations, some of which didn't even exist before. And there's been really fortification of some of the litigation strategies and monitoring activities. So that's all good. But I think that the last 4 years, besides the destruction of all kinds of norms and laws and terrible policies, demonstrate the weakness of the entire structures of governance, not to mention the disease in our polity.
Is it the weakness or the delicateness of something like this?
It's a good question. When I say the destruction of norms, I mean to identify how much of law, and the law particularly related to elections and politics, is not hardwired in the law. It really depends on professional assumptions about these are the norms of appropriate conduct. This is what reasonable people do. This is how we behave. And when those are violated, the law didn't have a lot to do in response. And there are holes all over the place.
And also, would it be fair to say, depending on one's interpretation of the law and getting people not even fundamentally agreeing on a definition of a law, which is really where I feel like we really are spinning out of control. Is there a way to get back to a basic, just foundational understanding? What is the purpose of law in a democracy?
Well, of course you are right. And frankly, the law in a democracy depends on assumptions that really were started during the Enlightenment. And those assumptions about reason, about truth, about facts, about what happened in the past is not something you can then dispute. Those are much more contested now than they have been in my lifetime. And the media plays a big role in this. And in addition, let's be frank, the administration that just departed was hell-bent on changing the judiciary. And they so far have succeeded. They have packed the federal courts in record time, filling circuit after circuit and district court positions with people who were handpicked with a particular ideology in mind. And whatever one's views about their ideology, many of them lacked basic qualifications. And those are life tenured positions. And that is a legacy that will be with us for 30, 40 years. Now, there is a possibility that the new administration will also have some openings. At the moment, there are only 5, but there are people who are holding out on the bench and trying not to retire, who will now retire. But because the Senate is so precarious, it will be challenging to see how many of those can get confirmed. At the moment, the cabinet hasn't even been fully confirmed. So, and there is now, sadly, in this country, a politicization of the confirmation process that can drag it out for years and years and years. I mean, let's remember that both Chief Justice of the United States and Justice Kagan currently were blocked when they were earlier nominated to go on lower courts. And they really ultimately got through to the Supreme Court only because of, propitious politics. So that's the world that we're living in right now.
What did you take from Merrick Garland's, not even getting a hearing?
Unprecedented.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about norms.
What is the higher purpose of the law? Like you saw things in Kosovo where it was different than what we have here. So what's the highest purpose of the law in America?
The rule of law is a phrase that has been used a lot, and I never really knew what it was until I did work in Kosovo, where I discovered that if there is not basic respect for the institutions like courts, and for rules like ownership of this property is defined by who has the title, that you have utter chaos. And the judiciary, rebuilding the judiciary after the war, required actually finding people who would not be immediately rejected by the litigants, as well they're on one side or another. But, to try to get aid from all over the world to Kosovo to rebuild was not going to work if it was being stolen and people didn't respect any rules about who was eligible for it. So I came back from that experience with a renewed faith and belief that in the United States, having operational courts, having rules that can be found, that are transparent, that people agree are the rules, is what enables not only private enterprise, but public activities to proceed. We now have that more in jeopardy than we did before. The law fundamentally creates security, order, predictability, so that human beings can lead their lives. But if the law is up for grabs, then human beings cannot lead orderly lives, cannot order their affairs, cannot be assured that whatever they thought was theirs will be theirs tomorrow, or whatever they hope to participate in, they will be allowed to tomorrow.
Do you think that there's in kind of creating a culture of confusion, what is the intention around lawlessness? What is the aim of someone or a leader or leadership that is looking to destabilize everything that we thought to be a functioning state?
Well, what's sad to say is that there is emerging a playbook, and it's a populist playbook that we have seen develop in Hungary and in Poland and in the Philippines, and sadly in the United States, that has also some sad resonance with the early phases of Hitler's period in Germany. And what unscrupulous leaders in ostensibly democratic societies want to do is to take over the existing institutions gradually and subtly, not by a military coup, not by something that is overt, but instead by stacking their membership with true believers and by undoing the content of the rules that prevent corruption, that prevent self-dealing, and that prevent the kind of punitive treatment of people who don't toe the line. And sadly, it turns out democracies can be toppled that way.
And where does social media come into that?
This is what makes this time so unprecedented, because while we have seen unscrupulous leaders, whether it was Rwanda more recently, there it was radio, not social media, but radio was sufficient to mobilize hatreds and actually to plant hatreds that hadn't even previously been existing, and to get people to pick up a machete and kill their neighbor, and in some cases their spouse. Now, social media being so pervasive and even worse, so targeted to individuals, so that individuals get a sculpted message. And social media, the big platforms, are really full employment agencies for psychologists. So they're experts in figuring out how to motivate people, how to make people afraid, how to get people engaged and outraged. So it's not an accidental activity. Look, we've always had propaganda. The Nazis were very talented at propaganda, but this is full-time business where the business model of the big platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Google to some extent, depends on this engagement, and the engagement is fueled by more outrage, and more outrage feeds more doubt about what people who disagree with you are saying. So the entire context in which the Enlightenment project of using reason to deal with human conflict is in jeopardy.
You know, when you talk about the Enlightenment, you know, what are the, you know, you mentioned Viktor Orban, you know, it's like, I don't know if, I mean, I don't know whether Viktor Orban is sitting there thinking, I want to take apart these democratic processes or not. What is the opposite of the Enlightenment, you know, and how does it come down to now, you know?
Well, I don't know whether it's a strength or weakness on my part that I can't fully imagine myself into the head of Viktor Orban. But
it's probably a good thing.
But unfortunately, as I say, there is a kind of playbook, and another way to see it is the warning signs of tyranny that people like Tim Snyder have so powerfully identified. And there's a checklist. So if you wanted to undo democratic accountability in general, you disable the media, or disarm them or buy them. And to some extent, frankly, this is going on in Israel right now. And another thing that you do is that you chill the courts, or you stack them, or you take them over. You change their personnel, you force retirements. Another thing you do is you change what the basic rules are so that change can be done with one person making those decisions. And you fuel pseudo militia. You fuel a kind of thuggish behavior, both literally street violence, and also thuggish behavior by allies who have market power. And that's a playbook, and it's been done, and it's being done.
But it's not new, right? I mean, it's just a play for power. I mean, it's been going on and on and on, right, for centuries. So I guess the question is, when the founders here, did they anticipate, how were they thinking to protect us from where we are now? What was in the basic foundation of this country? Were they anticipating that? What were we, and how were we going to account for it?
So it's a totally great question. And the founders were preoccupied with tyranny. But the tyranny that they knew and they wanted to guard against was a king. And so what they wanted to do was to take the power that was all collected in one person and divide it up. The framers' solution was divide up the powers in the federal government to 3 branches that check each other, and divide up the power by preserving state sovereignty, so that there are areas where the states can retain some pushback and some separate governance. Now, we saw that partly worked during this past year, where the strange mechanism that we have for federal elections that is governed by the states turned out to be a salvation. And the strange mechanism by which we have attorneys general of each state who operate often quite distinctly from their own governors, and definitely distinctly from the federal government, turned out to be a savior, so that they have been at the front lines of the resistance against a lot of Trump's worst policies. And frankly, something that the framers of the US Constitution I don't think thought about, because they didn't really have something as a point of reference that like today turned out to be a check and balance. And that's very large private sector actors, very large private sector actors who condemned January 6th. The framers didn't know of any very large private sector actors. They didn't exist. But in a curious and interesting way, and some people are troubled by it, the social media platforms have played a check and balance where the government is kind of hands are tied because of the First Amendment and otherwise. And it took them a long time, but they finally exercised their always existing ability to pull the plug.
Now, were they, is that a good thing that they turned off Trump? Is that is that really how we, do we lose our principles by shutting down his voice?
So it's going to be the question that's going to preoccupy people for a long, long time. And the oversight board for Facebook has now 20 some global figures that are going to debate it. I think it does not jeopardize anything in the First Amendment. Let's be very clear about that. The First Amendment only applies to government action. These are decisions by private actors. That's one reason that I say it's kind of a savior that wasn't anticipated really by the framers. But even if you just want to expand it to kind of free speech type values, not technically a legal question, I think there is absolutely no jeopardy to freedom of speech with the exercise of editorial control. Editors also have freedom of speech. And no one in history until now has ever had the expectation of being able to communicate costlessly, for free, to everyone in the world with no intermediary. So when the framers created the First Amendment, their expectation was the world they knew, in which access to any kind of printing press was held in the hands of an intermediary, someone who would edit and who would select. Moreover, the framers adopted the First Amendment in full knowledge of an existing set of common law rules, like rules against defamation and slander, rules of copyright, which exist to this day, which operate and apply to conventional media. Congress, in its wisdom, insulated the internet platforms. They do not answer to the exact same rules that apply to conventional media. That's Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And I think it's not surprising that members of both parties want to revisit Section 230, which may have been a great idea when the internet was just starting and there were just fledgling little companies. These are now the biggest companies in the world in any industry. They do not need to be insulated or, for that matter, subsidized by the government through that insulation.
Is part of the power of the Constitution that there's flexibility for every age to redefine what's needed?
I do think one reason that our Constitution is the longest still in existence written Constitution in the world, 220 some odd years, is that it builds in flexibility and capacity for change. The terms of the Constitution itself include many very general terms. It's very hard to amend in its formal process, but over time, the process of judicial interpretation has emerged to, in effect, amend the Constitution. What I think is more challenging is that technology has now amended the Constitution. And that didn't go through any process. And it has kicked out from underneath the Constitution its presuppositions. Its presuppositions about reason. Its presuppositions about facts matter. Its presuppositions about norms of professional conduct, intermediaries between the communication of information, et cetera, et cetera. Some people used to joke that air conditioning amended the Constitution by making it possible for the federal government to operate year-round. It's not a joke anymore to talk about the way technology has amended the Constitution.
The technology is on one side, but the humanness is on the other side. The human decisions that people make, that hasn't been amended. We still have the power to make the right decisions based on a set of morals, at the base of it. Yeah.
Yes, and I have some hope. I mean, the election came out with in my view, a good result. And Georgia was kind of a staggeringly amazing result, which shows not just human reason helps, but, old fashioned organizing and going and talking to people one by one by one, and empowering people who are technically given the vote to actually vote. It turns out makes a real difference. But human beings are complicated. We are complicated beings, and we can be manipulated. The framers knew that. The framers were extremely worried about factions. The framers were very worried about the ways in which mobs can get out of control. The framers didn't really like democracy. They were not populists. The Constitution is filled with all kinds of anti-democratic features. So right now we have, I think it's a majority of the Supreme Court, certainly 4 of them, are people who were nominated by presidents who were not elected by a majority of the population of America, and confirmed by a Senate where the votes did not reflect a majority of America because of the anti-democratic features of the Electoral College and of the Senate, which give representation not based on population, but based on states. Now, there are lots of ways in which I don't like that, but I think that the framers understood it's helpful to have a break on what might be mob rule, or a break on what might be passions of a moment.
Now,
you look at the difference between the House right now and the Senate, and it just shows the framers understood something. The people who are up for election every 2 years, they don't look over the long haul. I really pity, something I never thought I'd say, members of the Republican Party right now who are watching their party be destroyed by people who don't look beyond, a year from now. And that's why you have Senator McConnell coming down and criticizing a member of the House, unheard of. But he sees his party being torn apart, and he can have a longer view because he's in the Senate and doesn't face re-election.
You mean the GOP-Q? The GOP-Q now?
Yes.
Isn't that one of the, many countries have, 3 governing pieces. One of the things is that we have the Senate and the Congress. Isn't that one of the features that is really unique about America, that gives it its power? Just talking about that, 2 votes per state, and then, all the representational government. Isn't that a power that we have?
Well, it was an ingenious structure. It remains ingenious to have a bicameral system, to have a 2-tiered legislative branch, one which is much closer to the people, one which is more removed. Though, when it was originally set up, the Senate was selected not by the people, but by state legislatures. So that was the 17th Amendment that dramatically changed and increased direct democracy. But still, the Constitution anticipated, yes, putting up multiple branches and multiple divisions of branches would be a good thing. But nobody at the time of the founding anticipated the growth of the executive branch, the presidency, or the growth of judiciary. Some of the people who were offered initially positions on the Supreme Court turned it down. And they said they'd rather be Postmaster General, something where you actually had some power. It wasn't thought to be very significant, even when there were important questions. For example, after the election of 1800, the court didn't meet for 2 years. It just didn't have the position that it now has. And certainly with the executive branch, it was a few people. It wasn't thousands and thousands of people. So the assumption the framers had was that the Congress would be the powerful branch. The Congress, for reasons that others understand better than I do, has given away much of its power. It doesn't exercise its power. Some of it has to do with decisions by the other branches. So the Supreme Court's treatment of campaign finance is a major reason. The Supreme Court's refusal to oversee gerrymandered districts is a reason, so that you have log jams and failures of the Congress to be able to act, and also so many people in the thrall of the people who fund their campaigns, so that some would say, I don't agree with this, that Congress has delegated too much power to the administrative agencies. I don't think that's the problem, but I think that it's even those who think that would agree with the general view that the framers would be surprised to see the relative hollowing out of the power of the Congress. Even just take during the Trump administration, the numbers of times that the Congress would try to have a hearing and have oversight of someone in the executive branch. And an unwritten rule was, you at least have to show up. Members of the Trump administration not only didn't show up, the Congress didn't use the power that it has, the power of contempt.
Right.
So the executive won. Why didn't the Congress use that power? Well, that's the problem. Somebody else will help explain what has hollowed out their willingness to use the power. Is it the media? Is it the donors? I don't know.
So I guess my question was really to now the presidential power and the pardon, and the presidential pardon, which I know you feel very passionate about, and in the hands of what would consider a compassionate, perhaps, president, perhaps this pardon it could be a forgiveness, all of these things that are important. But were the framers, was there an understanding it could also go back into the hands of someone that might be vindictive or abuse the power, and how do we reconcile that, a presidential pardon?
I don't think that the framers anticipated someone who was so corrupt. After all, these framers put into the Constitution that the president should not benefit from emoluments, from gifts from foreign countries, for example. And certainly the framers never anticipated campaign finance of the nature that we currently have. But for whatever, whether there's wisdom or not, the framers preserved one little piece of the absolute power of a king, and that was the pardon. Their theory was this will be a check on the judiciary. So if the judiciary is out of control or convicts someone in a way that really is not good for the people, it's not good for politics, the president should have a pardon power. And frankly, other countries have followed this too, and so have the states. The governors have this power. What's interesting to me is that the more modern democracies have not deposited this power 100% in one person. So South Africa, for example, makes the pardons subject to judicial review. There are some countries that give the pardon power to a council, multi-member council, with the recognition that there can be corruption and abuse. And the very fact that we were down to the last day of the Trump administration wondering, would there be a self-pardon? Unimaginable in other countries. So there's an area where it seems like we ought to have a law right now that says that there can't be a self-pardon. Whether it's constitutional is an interesting question, but a debate about it would be helpful. The problem with Trump's pardons is not simply that he rewarded people who were loyal to him. Frankly, Bill Clinton did that in pardoning Mark Rich. The problem is that that's essentially all he did with the pardon power, and that he used it to disrupt and to disorder the other accountability mechanisms by dangling offers of pardons to people and urging them, therefore, not to participate in investigations by the Congress or by the courts, or by actually offering a commutation of existing punishments for people that was basically saying to others, I'll be there for you, I'll protect you. So don't cooperate with anyone who is seeking to unearth my evil doings or my bad doings. That's unprecedented. And that's very dangerous. And, I don't blame the framers for not anticipating it. Who would have anticipated that this is where we would be in this country?
A lot of people on January 6th got sort of taken up in the moment and dragged into the Capitol in one way or another. Not all, some of those were really bad people. But, do we do enough about mercy and forgiveness in this country? Not even just there, just in all aspects of we're so focused on punitive measures that is something profound lost in this.
Well, yes. I mean, we are the most incarcerating society in the history of the planet. We incarcerate more people per population than any other society today or in the past. And I do think that that reflects a pendulum that has swung so far against mercy and so towards punitive sentences, where the same crime in another country would not generate the length of a sentence, much less the racially disproportionate prosecutions and policing. Every civilization in human experience has developed mechanisms of forgiveness. Every religion, every philosophy, and the people who study the behavior of large mammals, large apes, have demonstrated that there are forgiveness rituals that have been developed in their societies as well after a fight, a kind of mutual grooming, for example. So it turns out there's something about our kind of species that actually needs to have an escape valve and a way to come back after violence or after conflict. And the cultivation of the habits and the practices of forgiveness, I think, help families get along and help societies get along. I think that it's striking to me that many people clearly do not know how to give an apology. We have currently before us in areas ranging from Me Too to white collar crime, people who are called out for misbehavior and seem unable to give an actual apology, give the non-apology apology if anyone was harmed, etc. Congresswoman Green is a good example. She seemed incapable of even acknowledging her conduct, which is a precondition for an apology. I actually did the following and I own it, much less apologizing and not taking the additional step that many think is important for an apology, which is I will make reparations. I will take affirmative steps to repair the harm that I've done. Those are the elements of an apology. And I think, frankly, we ought to be teaching apologies in school because people seem not to know what it takes. Now, do you have to apologize in order to be forgiven? Here's where different religious traditions differ. Some say yes, some say actually unilateral forgiveness is blessed because that's something that a divine being would do. I'm more of the former camp. I think that apologies and actually reparations are important. And certainly no one has a right to forgiveness. And I think there's no tradition that says that. I think our legal system could have much more forgiveness, put aside the presidential pardon. There are many, many mechanisms inside of the legal system where actors ranging from prosecutors, police officers, judges, can forgive, can let go of justified pursuit of law enforcement, and can do so for an assessment of the conditions of the individual, whether they have apologized or made reparations, or can do so because they see there's a greater good. And we've seen that actually even in the course of legislative efforts to legislate, for example, forgiveness for war resistors after the Vietnam War, or legislate or executive power can be used there with regard to people who violate the immigration laws. And we often, I think, could take a lesson from the pages of civilizations through time, from the Jubilee on, actually even before the Jubilee in the Bible. There was an Egyptian and a Babylonian experience of mass forgiveness, that a reset button, if you will, where the society has gotten out of whack, too much punitiveness.
in bankruptcy, which is a form of forgiveness, we have a set of laws. Do we need to codify some of the ideas of forgiveness so that we have a structure by which people can make decisions?
I love that question. In a book that I wrote recently called When Should Law Forgive, I juxtapose bankruptcy laws with our criminal justice system for precisely that reason. And it's not by accident that we use the same words in both contexts. We talk about forgiveness, forgiving a debt, forgiving a crime. But what we don't have a parallel, it's just what you're saying is an elaborated system of rules for forgiving crimes. And nor do we have even the more informal understanding that after bankruptcy, we allow people to have a fresh start. That's the phrase, a fresh start, a blank page. We don't do that in criminal law. Right now in this country, states are allowed to, and most states engage in the conduct of what they call collateral consequences of crime. So even someone who has served their sentence can face further consequences of having a criminal record, being barred from credit, being unable to rent an apartment in public housing, in some places losing custody of their children, being denied a license to participate in certain occupations. Those are the kinds of unforgiving behaviors that would not be paralleled in the bankruptcy context, where you're allowed to start over and have a fresh start. I think we desperately need that in this country.
When you think about, reconciliation, for example, with Archbishop Tutu, and do you also need, you have the law, but then do you also need that kind of emotional, psychological, human understanding? As you were saying, maybe we teach it in the schools. We sort of have to have a framework that can work hand in hand with the legal end of the idea of forgiveness.
No, I'm very sympathetic to that. And I think it's a cultural issue as well as a legal issue. They're related to each other. When South Africa developed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because the courts and the law had been part and parcel of apartheid, any steps for building a new society would have to be outside the courts. And the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was quite specifically done with that in mind. And therefore, having Archbishop Tutu as the chair was setting a tone that couldn't be done in the courts because they were contaminated by the apartheid regime. I don't know if we have a person or a tradition in this country who could provide that kind of moral leadership. But I do think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that experience and from other reconciliation efforts, just to get the formal truth told, to have some agreed upon record about what happened. We're seeing, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and other areas where racial riots and racial injustice occurred in this country, and there's never been an agreed upon record about what happened. There are valuable efforts underway as we speak to get that first step towards reconciliation underway.
What is the importance of mentors? And what did you see in Ruth Bader Ginsburg that made her a mentor?
Nobody can make it in life alone. We all rely on direct and indirect help. And one of the best kinds of help is someone who actually wants you to succeed, gives you advice. And even if it's not someone you know personally, someone who gives you inspiration by being a model for what you want to be. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was both kinds of inspirations. She went out of her way to help people and open doors for them. She did that for me. She did that for many, many, many young lawyers. And she also inspired people in all walks of life to overcome obstacles, to be human and genuine in her dealings, to be persuasive by understanding where the others are coming from, to whom she was talking, and to be friends with people with whom she sharply disagreed. Those are examples that we need very badly right now.
You know, was there something about her personally that you saw in her that was unique that helped push you forward? And
I was very lucky to know her early in my career. Seeing a small, quiet, introverted woman be so ferociously intellectually powerful was very inspiring to me. In addition, the fact that she did open doors for me made me realize I could do that for other people. Absolutely. Not only I could, but I had an obligation to do so.
you know, your relationship with well, I guess she was Dean Elena Kagan when you first met her, was that a similar kind of relationship?
Dean Elena Kagan, when I first met her, was my student. And we went from that relationship to then she was my colleague, to then she was my boss. And now I joke with her and tell her she writes my teaching materials.
Right.
So she is, just an extraordinary human being, absolutely brilliant, and was as a student, and just absolutely stupendous dean. I became dean largely because she asked me to help. And then when she got a better job, I wanted some of the things that she had started to continue. She continues to, I think, bring a kind of clarity and humanness, along with shrewd legal acumen, to the work of the Supreme Court, just as she did in the entire time that I have known her.
You know, is there, when you have all these students, is there, you know, when you're looking out from the dais, you know, can you recognize what that is? Can you look out there and say, oh wow, here's Barack Obama, and
There's
you know,
the president.
this guy's got a future? I mean, do you see it right away?
You know, in his case, I certainly thought he had something very special. And within a few years after his graduation, I asked him if he was going to run for president. I do feel that I have an incredible privilege to work every day with extraordinarily talented people. And frankly, I feel like my job is to make sure that all the paths are open to them. And the fact that there are graduates whose names you don't know, but who have gone on to be the pivotal person in their own community, the mayor, the person who's providing legal services to poor people when no one else would. I would say all of my students have that capacity.
Is there a thing to impart, you know, that's the, you know, we're on the Media Lab board, the MIT Media Lab board, and Marshall's on there. And, you know, Marshall always, you know, he imparts something, you know, about the spirit of the things he's interested in. Is there a thing about the law that you have to get across to people that's about the spirit of it?
Oh my goodness, yes. And in fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in a speech she gave about 5-10 years ago, evoked a wonderful phrase from Learned Hand, a great justice, about the spirit of liberty is what's necessary. You can have all the laws in the world, but if you haven't cultivated the spirit of liberty, where people demand their liberty, you won't have it. And so what I've called norms here in our discussion include the kind of mutual respect, the kind of tolerance, the kind of, yes, forgiveness, the kind of decency that are the underpinnings of the law. I think that the law can make us safe, but only if the people who actually administer it have that spirit of wanting it to serve the people. Otherwise, it can be a tool of oppression.
It's fantastic, Martha. Thank you so much for coming on. This is incredible.
Thank you. Wonderful questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha. Good to see you. I'll see you
Good to see
soon.
you.
Bye.
Great.